The Vractari had ruled the stars as hunters for 10,000 years, and no species had ever challenged their dominance in the art of killing. They stood 8 feet tall with scales that shifted color, like oil on water, and their eyes could see heat. Signatures through solid walls, and their claws could tear through starship hull plating like wet paper. Every century, the Vractari held a sacred festival called the Grand Culling, where their young warriors proved themselves worthy by hunting a chosen species across its home world. The selection of prey was considered a great honor in Vractari culture, and the High Stalkers spent years studying potential targets before making their choice. This cycle, the scout ships had discovered a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system on the edge of the galaxy, and the creatures that lived there seemed perfect in every way. Ambassador Kethrak reviewed the data on his personal screen as his ship approached the Galactic Council station, and he could not contain his excitement at what he saw. The dominant species called themselves humans, and they were laughably weak by any reasonable standard. They had no claws and no fangs and no venom and no armor plating of any kind. Their eyes could only see a tiny sliver of the light spectrum, and they were completely blind in darkness without artificial assistance. They could not hear ultrasonic frequencies, and they could not smell chemical traces from miles away, and they could not sense electromagnetic fields. Their running speed was pathetic, and their strength was mediocre, and a single Vractari warrior could tear apart 10 of them without breaking a sweat. Kethrak showed the data to his advisors, and they all agreed that this would be the easiest culling in recorded history. The young warriors would barely have to try, and the festival would be more of a vacation than a trial. When Kethrak entered the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, he walked with the confidence of an apex predator who had never known fear. Representatives from 300 species filled the circular room, and they all turned to watch the Vractari ambassador take his place at the speaking platform. Honored delegates of the council, Kethrak announced in a booming voice, the Vractari Dominion formally declares our selection for the next grand culling. He activated the holographic display, and an image of Earth appeared floating above the chamber. The species known as humans of the planet designated Earth 3 in your records. Strange silence fell over the chamber, and Kethrak noticed something he had never seen before. At a culling announcement, the other species were not reacting with their usual indifference or mild sympathy for the chosen prey. They were looking at each other with expressions that seemed almost like concerned. Morlethi delegate rose slowly from its seat, and this ancient being had witnessed more than 50 cullings over its impossibly long lifespan. Ambassador Kethrak, the Morlethi said in its whispering voice, the Council does not typically interfere with Vractari traditions, but we feel compelled to offer a warning. Kethrak's eyes flared with amusement because no species had ever tried to discourage culling before. You have something to say about our choice of prey? We would advise that you reconsider. The Morlethi continued, humans are not what they appear to be. They appear to be soft and slow and defenseless. Kethrak laughed. Are you suggesting they are secretly dangerous? We are suggesting that there is a reason the spacefaring species who have encountered humans treat them with great caution. The Morlethi replied, we are suggesting that you study them more carefully before you commit to this course. Kethrak waved his clawed hand dismissively because he had heard rumors about humans before, and he considered them nothing more than spacer superstitions. Some traders claimed that humans were unnaturally persistent, and others said they had a disturbing creativity when it came to violence. But Kethrak had seen the data, and the data showed a weak species with no natural weapons. The Vractari do not fear prey, he declared, and we certainly do not change our traditions based on rumors and whispers. The chamber doors opened, and the human delegation entered, and Kethrak got his first look at the species he intended to hunt. They were even less impressive in person than they had been in the reports. The lead human was a small female with graying hair, and she walked with calm, measured steps that showed no fear whatsoever. This was Dr. Sarah Chun, and she had served as humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 15 years. Took her place at the speaking platform across from Kethrak and looked up at him with steady brown eyes. "Ambassador Kethrak," she said in a pleasant voice, "I understand you wish to hunt my species." "It is not a wish," Kethrak replied. "It is a formal declaration under galactic law, and your species has been chosen for the grand culling." "I see." Dr. Chun nodded slowly. "And what exactly does this culling involve?" 300 of our finest young hunters will descend upon your planet," Kethrak explained with pride. "They will hunt your kind for 1 lunar cycle, and those who prove themselves worthy will earn their place in Vraktari society. So you intend to land on Earth and kill humans for sport?" Dr. Chun summarized. "For honor," Kethrak corrected her. "The hunt is sacred to our people, Doctor." Chen was quiet for a moment, and then she did something that confused every Vraktari in the chamber. She smiled. "We accept your challenge," she said simply. Kethrak had not expected acceptance, and he had prepared arguments to overcome human objections, but the small female had agreed without any resistance. "You accept?" he asked uncertainly. "We do," Dr. Chun confirmed. "But we should warn you about something first." "And what is that?" "On Earth we have a name for creatures like you," she said, and her smile grew wider. "Creatures with sharp claws and big teeth who think they sit at the top of the food chain." Kethrak leaned forward because something in her tone made his instincts twitch. "What name is that?" "Endangered species," Dr. Chun replied. The chamber fell silent again, and Kethrak saw that the other delegates were looking at the human with expressions of knowing respect. "Is that supposed to frighten me?" Kethrak demanded. "No," Dr. Chun shook her head. "It is supposed to inform you, but I suspect you will not understand the warning until it is too late." She turned and walked out of the chamber, and her small delegation followed behind her. Kethrak watched them go, and he felt a strange sensation crawling up his spine that he could not identify. It was not fear, because the Vraktari did not feel fear. It was something else. It was the first hint that he had made a terrible mistake, but he pushed the feeling aside and turned back to the council to finalize the arrangements for the culling in 3 lunar cycles. The hunt would begin, and the Vraktari would add another species to their long list of conquered prey. At least, that was what Kethrak believed. He could not have been more wrong. The 300 Vraktari hunters descended through Earth's atmosphere on a cold autumn night, and their dropships made no sound as they settled into a remote stretch of Montana wilderness. High Stalker Varath had chosen this location personally. After studying satellite imagery for weeks, the terrain was perfect, with dense forests and steep mountains and deep valleys that would make the hunt interesting. Zinjafidnin settlement sat in the middle of the hunting zone, with perhaps 50 inhabitants living in scattered cabins and farmhouses. These humans were isolated from their larger population centers, and they would have no help coming when the killing started. Varath divided his hunters into 60 parties of 5, and he gave them their orders. With pride swelling in his chest, "Spread out and find the prey," he commanded. "Remember that this is a sacred trial, and you must prove yourselves worthy through skill and patience." "What resistance should we expect?" asked young Shrix, who was participating in his first culling. "None," Varath replied with a dismissive gesture. "These creatures have no natural weapons, and their technology is primitive compared to ours. Then why do the other species fear them?" Shrix Varath's crest flattened with irritation because he was tired of hearing this question. "They do not fear humans," he insisted. "They simply do not understand them, and what is not understood is often treated with unwarranted caution." The hunters activated their thermal vision and spread out into the darkness, and Shrix moved with his party through the dense pine forest. The night was cold and quiet, and the only sounds were the soft footsteps of Vraktari, claws on fallen leaves. Shrix could see the heat signatures of small animals fleeing from their approach, and he felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. Building in his blood, his party leader Keth was a veteran of 3 previous. Collins and he moved with practiced efficiency through the underbrush. The settlement is 2 kilometers north. Keth reported over their communication channel. I am detecting heat signatures from multiple structures. They moved toward the human dwellings with anticipation growing in their hearts. Rix imagined the screaming and the panic and the desperate attempts to flee that he had witnessed in training recordings from previous culling spree species always reacted the same way when the Triad Vractari came for them. They ran and they hid and they begged and they died. But when the hunting party reached the settlement, they found something unexpected. The buildings were empty. Rix swept his thermal vision across the cabins, and he saw nothing but cooling surfaces and dead machinery. Where are they? He asked with confusion creeping into his voice. Keth moved to a large structure that appeared to be a central meeting place, and he forced open the door with one powerful strike inside. They found tables covered with abandoned meals and drinks that were still warm and personal belongings scattered, as if the owners had left in a hurry, but there was no panic in the arrangement. Everything was too neat and too organized for a sudden evacuation. They knew we were coming. Shrix realized with a chill running down his spine. Impossible. Keth growled. Our ships are completely undetectable to human technology. He moved to a smaller room and stopped suddenly when he saw what waited inside. A small device sat on a table with a glowing screen that displayed moving images. Keth recognized it as a primitive human computing device, and the images it showed made his blood run cold. The screen displayed their landing site from 3 different angles, and it showed their dropship settling into the clearing with timestamps marking exactly when they had arrived. 6 hours before the Vractari landed, someone had set up cameras to record their approach. They knew. Shrix whispered. They knew exactly when and where we would arrive. Keth smashed the device with his fist and led his party back outside to report to High Stalker Varth. But as they moved through the settlement, they began to notice other disturbing details. Tracks led away from the buildings in organized patterns with no signs of running or stumbling vehicle. Tire marks showed that the humans had driven away calmly and methodically, and the tracks did not lead toward the nearest city or any location where the humans might find safety. They led deeper into the forest. They are not fleeing, Shrix said with growing unease. They are repositioning. Before Keth could respond, their communication channel crackled with an urgent transmission from another hunting party. This is Party 7 requesting immediate assistance, a panicked voice shouted. We are under attack, and we cannot see the enemy. The transmission cut off with a scream, and then there's only silence. Keth tried to raise Party 7 on the channel, but there was no response. All parties report status. High Stalker Varth commanded. Over the main frequency, 58 parties responded with confirmation. Party 7 and Party 12 remained silent. Converge on Party 7's last known position. Varth ordered, we will find what did this, and we will make them pay. 30 Vractari. Hunters moved through the forest toward the coordinates, and Shrix felt his heart pounding with an emotion he did not recognize when they reached the location. They found nothing but empty ground. No bodies and no blood and no signs of struggle. Party 7 and Party 12 had simply vanished as if they had never existed. Hunters spread out to search the area, and it was Shrix who found the first evidence of what had happened. A small clearing sat in the middle of the search zone, and on a tree stump in the center, someone had arranged 10 small objects in a neat row. Shrix approached cautiously, and his blood turned to ice when he recognized what he was seeing. They were tracking devices, the subcutaneous implants that every Vractari hunter carried in their skull for emergency location purposes. Someone had removed these devices from 10 hunters and arranged them here as a message. Beside the implants lay a small piece of paper with symbols scratched on it in black. Shrix did not read the human language, but his translation device converted the message into words he could understand. Your move He stared at the note for a long moment and finally identified the emotion that had been building in his chest since they found the empty settlement. It was fear. The Vrakthari had come to this world as hunters seeking easy prey, but something was hunting them instead, and it was only the first night. Ice Stalker Varth called all remaining hunters back to the main camp after the third night of losses. 27 Vrakthari had vanished without a trace, and no one had seen a single human since the landing. Varth stood before his demoralized warriors and tried to project confidence that he no longer felt, "We are the greatest hunters in the galaxy." He reminded them, "We have conquered 60 species, and we will not be defeated by soft creatures with no claws." But his words rang hollow, and everyone knew it. Elder Morvax was the oldest hunter in the expedition, and he had survived more cullings than anyone else alive. He approached Varath after the gathering dispersed and spoke in a low voice that others could not hear. "We made a mistake." Morvax said simply, "We did not study this species properly before we came. We studied them extensively." Varath protested. "We know their physical capabilities and their technology and their population centers. We studied them as prey." Morvax corrected him. "We need to study them as predators." Varath wanted to argue, but 27 missing hunters had stolen his confidence. "What do you suggest?" "I will access their information networks," Morvax replied. "I will learn what they are and how they became what they are." He retreated to his personal shelter and connected his computing device to the human data network that they called the Internet. What he found over the next several hours changed everything he thought he knew about this species. Humans did not hunt for food the way most predators did. They hunted for sport and for safety and for something they called trophies. Morvax found images of humans standing over the bodies of dead predators with expressions of pride and satisfaction on their faces. They had killed lions and tigers and bears and wolves and sharks and crocodiles and every other apex predator their planet had produced. They did not kill these creatures because they needed to eat them. They killed them because they wanted to end. They had been doing it for thousands of years. Morvax discovered records of ancient humans hunting creatures called mammoths that stood twice as tall as a Vrakthari warrior. These humans had no advanced technology and no natural weapons, but they had driven the mammoths to complete extinction. He found descriptions of something called persistence hunting, where humans would follow wounded prey for days across entire continents. They did not need to be fast because they simply never stopped. They would track an animal until it collapsed from exhaustion, and then they would kill it at their leisure. The more Morvax read, the more disturbed he became. Humans had domesticated wolves and turned these apex predators into obedient servants that helped them hunt other animals. They had conquered horses and elephants and used these creatures as tools of war. Every species on their planet that had threatened them was now either extinct or completely under human control. But the most terrifying discoveries were what humans did when they themselves became prey. Morvax found records of human conflicts, and he learned about warriors who had turned their own weaknesses into advantages. He read about a human called the White Death who had killed over 500 enemies in a frozen forest by hiding in snowbanks and waiting with infinite patience. He learned about tunnel networks in a place called Vietnam, where humans had fought invaders by disappearing underground and striking without warning. Discovered something called guerrilla warfare, where small groups of humans had defeated much larger and better equipped forces through deception and ambush and psychological terror. Humans did not fight fair. They did not follow rules of honor or engage in direct confrontation when they were outmatched. They set traps and they laid ambushes and they attacked from hiding. And they melted away before anyone could strike back. And they did these things with a creativity that Morvax found genuinely frightening. He finally understood why the other galactic species had tried to warn them. Humans were not prey animals who had somehow developed technology. They were predators who had learned to disguise themselves as something harmless. They had spent Millions of years fighting for survival against every dangerous creature their hostile world could produce. And they had won every single time. Morvax closed his computing device and sat in silence for a long moment before going to find Vareth. "I know what we are facing," he said when he found the High Stalker. "Tell me, these creatures are persistent predators." Morvax explained. "They evolved to hunt by following their prey until it dropped from exhaustion. That does not explain how they are defeating us." Vareth replied. "They are patient," Morvax continued. "They do not need to win quickly, and they do not need to win dramatically. They are willing to wait and watch and learn before they strike. And when they do strike, they aim for maximum effect, with minimum risk to themselves." Vareth considered this information with growing dread. How do we fight such an enemy? Before Morvax could answer, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. Hunters were shouting, and weapons were being raised, and everyone was pointing at a lone figure, walking calmly toward them through the darkness. It was a humana. Single human male was approaching the camp, with his hands raised above his head in what the translation database said was a gesture of non-aggression. He was old, with weathered skin and gray hair, and he wore simple clothing that offered no protection whatsoever. 30 Vrakthari hunters surrounded him with targeting lasers, painting his chest in red dots. Human stopped walking and stood perfectly still, with no fear visible on his face. "My name is Earl," he said in a slow, steady voice, "and I am here to offer you a deal." Vareth pushed through the crowd to face this strange creature. "You are in no position to offer deals," he growled. "You are surrounded and outmatched." "Am I?" Earl asked with a slight smile. "I count about 270 of you left. That means 30 of your boys are already gone, and you have not seen a single one of us until right now." Vareth felt his crest flatten with involuntary unease. "What deal do you offer?" "Go home now," Earl said simply. "Pack up your ships and leave this planet, and only 12 more of you have to die." 12? Vareth asked. "Why 12? "Because we already have 12 of your hunters in our sights right now," Earl explained. "And they will die the moment you make any hostile move against me." Vareth looked at his hunters and saw 12 of them shift uncomfortably as they realized they might be the ones marked for death. "Stay here," Earl continued, "and we start really hunting. We are the hunters." Vareth insisted with false bravado. "No." Earl shook his head slowly. "You were the hunters. Now you are just prey that has not figured it out yet." Vareth's pride would not allow him to accept this insult. "Seize him," he commanded. Earl smiled and tapped his chest twice. "Boys," he said calmly, "light them up." The forest around them exploded with light and sound and chaos as the humans finally revealed themselves, and the real lesson began. The attack on the camp killed 43 Vrakthari in the first 3 minutes. Explosions tore through supply shelters and weapons caches, and the hunters scattered in panic as fire rained down from positions they could not see. By the time the Vrakthari regrouped and organized a counterattack, the humans had vanished back into the forest. They left behind only flames and bodies in fear. High Stalker Vareth surveyed the devastation with something close to despair in his heart. How did they get so close without being detected? He demanded. No one had an answer. The Vrakthari had thermal vision that should have revealed any warm-blooded creature within a kilometer, but the humans had somehow hidden their heat signatures and approached to within striking distance without triggering a single alarm. Over the following 3 weeks, the survivors learned exactly how dangerous human beings could. Lady Vrakthari tried to use their superior numbers to surround human positions, but the humans were never where they expected them to be. Hunting parties would converge on a suspected location, only to find empty ground and sometimes traps. The traps were the worst part. Humans could not match Vrakthari's strength or speed in direct combat, so they did not fight directly. Instead, they dug pits and covered them with branches and filled them with sharpened wooden stakes that could pierce even Vrakthari's scales. They strung thin wires across forest paths at neck height where running hunters would not see them until too late. They built devices that launched projectiles when someone stepped on hidden triggers, and they poisoned water sources with substances that made Rakthari hunters violently ill without killing them. The humans wanted the Rakthari sick and weak and afraid. They wanted to destroy their morale as much as their bodies. Young Shrix watched his hunting party dwindle day by day as the humans picked them off. One by one, his party leader Keth was taken on the 8th day when he stepped into a concealed pit and broke both legs on mistakes. Beloushrix heard his screams for hours as the humans left him there to suffer. When a rescue party finally reached the pit, they found Keth dead with a single wound to his throat. The humans had waited until the Rakthari were close enough to watch, and then they had killed their prisoner in front of them. It was a message: rescue attempts would be punished. The psychological warfare was relentless. Rakthar hunters began finding their dead comrades arranged in disturbing poses as warnings to others. Bodies were positioned sitting against trees with their claws crossed on their chests. Heads were placed on stakes along patrol routes, and always there were notes with simple messages in human writing: "We see you. Run. You are next." The hunters stopped sleeping because every time they closed their eyes, they expected to feel human blades at their throats. Their communication channels were somehow infiltrated and filled with recordings of Rakthari death screams that played at random intervals. Individual hunters reported being followed for days by watchers they could glimpse only briefly before they disappeared. The humans let themselves be seen just often enough to keep the Rakthari terrified, and then when the fear had peaked, they would strike. Shrix was one of the few hunters who survived long enough to understand what was happening. The humans were using the same techniques they had developed over millions of years of hunting dangerous prey. They were patient and methodical, and they never took unnecessary risks. They studied their enemies and learned their weaknesses and exploited every advantage they could find. The Rakthari had thermal vision, so the humans used special blankets that blocked heat signatures. The Rakthari had superior hearing, so the humans moved slowly and carefully and made no unnecessary sounds. The Rakthari were stronger, so the humans never engaged in close combat. They killed from a distance with weapons that hurled metal projectiles faster than sound. They killed from hiding with traps that required no strength to operate. They killed with poison and fire and psychological terror, and they never stopped. On the 21st day Shrix was captured, he had been stalking what he thought was a lone human through the forest when he stepped into a snare that yanked him off his feet and left him hanging upside down from a tree branch. Humans emerged from the underbrush around him, and he realized the lone figure had been bait. They cut him down and bound his claws and dragged him to a cabin deep in the forest. He expected torture and slow death. Instead, he woke up in a warm room with his wounds treated and clean bandages wrapped around his injuries. A circle of humans sat watching him, and they were drinking a dark, bitter liquid from ceramic cups. Shrix recognized some of them from reports of previous attacks. The old male called Earl was there along with several younger humans of both sexes, and sitting in the center was an old female with gray hair and wrinkled skin and eyes that had seen more death than Shrix could imagine. Why? Shrix managed to ask through the pain of his injuries. "Why did you not kill me?" The old female poured some of the dark liquid into a cup and held it out to him. "Because we want you to go home," she said simply, "and tell them what happens when you hunt humans. You could have killed all of us," Shrix realized. "From the very beginning, you could have killed us all." "Yes," the old female agreed, "but we wanted survivors. We wanted witnesses." She leaned forward, and Shrix saw something ancient and dangerous in her eyes. "We have been fighting things trying to kill us since we climbed down from the trees," she said. "Saber-toothed cats and cave bears and dire wolves and giant snakes and each other. Everything on our world wanted us dead, and we were small and soft and slow. But we survived. We did more than survive. We won. She gestured around the room at the other humans. Every predator that hunted our ancestors is now extinct. She continued, and we did not kill them by accident. We hunted them down, and we wiped them out because we decided that nothing would ever hunt us again. Shrix felt cold despite the warmth of the room. You are not special, the old female said softly. You are not the first predator to think humans would be easy prey. You are just the latest in a very long line, and that line is extinct. She stood and looked down at him with something like pity. Go home, she repeated. Tell your people what you saw here. Tell them that humans do not forget, and we do not forgive, and we do not stop until the threat is eliminated. And then pray that we never decide you are a threat worth eliminating permanently. Shrix was released the next morning, and he walked for 3 days until he reached the emergency extraction point. He was the only Vractari who made it out alive. 300 hunters had come to Earth seeking easy prey. One returned home to deliver the humans' message, and he would carry their warning to the stars. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so silent. 300 delegates from species across the galaxy sat in their seats and stared at the lone Vractari standing at the testimony platform. Shrix had spent 3 months recovering from his wounds before he was strong enough to make this journey. His scales were still marked with scars that would never fully heal, and his left eye had been permanently damaged in his capture. But the deepest wounds were in his mind. He had not slept well since returning from Earth, and every time he closed his eyes he saw human faces watching him from the darkness. The High Council of the Vractari Dominion sat in the elevated gallery reserved for the species conducting a culling. They had expected to hear reports of victory and triumph. Instead, they were about to hear something that would shake the foundations of their entire civilization. Honored delegates. Shrix began in a voice that trembled despite his efforts to control it. I stand before you as the sole survivor of the grand culling on the human world called Earth. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. No culling had ever resulted in such catastrophic losses. 300 of our finest hunters descended on that world. Shrix continued. We were confident and prepared, and we believed we understood our prey. He paused and looked at the Vractari High Council. We understood nothing. He activated the holographic display, and images appeared floating above the chamber. They showed the remains of Vractari camps destroyed by human attacks. They showed the traps and ambush sites where hunters had died. They showed the notes left behind with their mocking messages. We thought humans were prey because they lack claws and fangs. Shrix said. We looked at their soft bodies and their weak senses, and we saw easy targets. We were fools. He changed the display to show images from human history that Elder Morvax had gathered before his death lions and tigers and bears lying dead at the feet of smiling humans. Ancient cave paintings showing humans hunting mammoths with nothing but wooden spears. Photographs of human soldiers in countless wars across their world's history. Humans do not need natural weapons because they create weapons. Shrix explained. They do not need armor because they build shelters that protect them from any threat. They do not need speed because they have something far more dangerous. They have patience. The chamber was utterly silent as Shrix continued his testimony. Humans are what their scientists call persistence predators. He said, their ancestors did not hunt by chasing prey and catching it. They hunted by following prey across entire continents until it collapsed from exhaustion. They would track a wounded animal for days without rest, and they would never give up, and they would never stop. And when the animal finally could not run anymore, the humans would kill it at their leisure. He looked around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces watching him. They did this to animals faster and stronger than themselves. He said, they did it with no technology and no advantages except their ability to keep going when anything else would have stopped. and they have been doing it for millions of years. Shrix changed the display again to show images of extinct Earth predators. Every apex predator on their planet is now either extinct or completely under human control. He continued, the saber-toothed cats that hunted their ancestors are gone. The cave bears and dire wolves and giant hyenas are gone. Humans did not coexist with these creatures. They eliminated them, systematically, deliberately, completely. He turned to face the Rajuri High Council directly. We have spent 10,000 years as the galaxy's greatest hunters. Shrix said, we have conducted 60 cullings, and we have never faced true resistance. But humans? His voice cracked with emotion. Humans spent millions of years being hunted by everything on their world. They did not become timid. They did not become cautious. They became angry. They decided that nothing would ever hunt them again. And they meant it. The High Stalker of the Vracthory rose from his seat with fury on his face. You expect us to believe that 300 elite warriors were defeated by soft creatures with no natural weapons? He demanded. I expect you to learn from our mistake. Shrix replied, I expect you to understand that we misjudge these beings completely. They are not prey. They have never been prey. They are the most successful predators their planet has ever produced, and they simply do not look like it. Human delegation entered the chamber, and Dr. Sarah Chun walked to the speaking platform with the same calm confidence she had displayed at the culling announcement. She looked up at the Vracthory High Council and waited for silence. The Vracthory have formally requested a cessation of hostilities, she announced. Humanity has agreed to grant this request, on conditions. She added, the High Stalker's crest flattened with humiliation, but he nodded for her to continue. The grand culling will end permanently. Dr. Chen stated, no species will ever be hunted by the Vracthory again. The Vracthory Dominion will pay reparations to every species that has been subjected to previous cullings. And the Vracthory will formally recognize humanity as equals under galactic law. These were terms of surrender, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The greatest hunters in the galaxy had been humbled by a species they had dismissed as helpless prey. The High Stalker had no choice but to accept. When the session ended, the Moilithi delegate approached Dr. Chun with slow, deliberate steps. We tried to warn them. The ancient being said, we have watched your species for some time, and we know what you are. And what are we? Dr. Chun asked. The Moilithi considered the question for a long moment. Every species in this galaxy evolved to fill a niche. It finally replied, predator or prey and specialist or generalist. We each have our place in the natural order. But humans? The ancient being made a sound that might have been a sigh. Humans evolved to win. It said, whatever the contest and whatever the cost. You do not accept limitations and you do not acknowledge defeat. You simply keep trying until you succeed or until you destroy yourselves in the attempt. Dr. Chun smiled the same calm smile she had worn since the beginning. We prefer to think of it as refusing to lose. She replied. She turned and walked away, and the Moilithi watched her go with an expression that mixed respect with something very close to fear. The humans had proven themselves to the galaxy. They had shown that they would not be hunted and they would not be conquered, and they would not be intimidated by any species, no matter how powerful. And the wise species of the galaxy took note. They treated humans with respect from that day forward, not because they admired humanity, but because they had seen what happened to those who underestimated them, and they wanted no part of that fate the Vracthory had come to Earth as hunters seeking easy prey. They had learned a lesson that would reshape their entire civilization. Some species are not meant to be hunted. Some species are the ones who do the hunting, and humanity had spent millions of years proving exactly which category they belonged to. The galaxy would not forget, and neither would the Vracthory.